And yeah, can't you see you're looking for trouble? Try to keep it chill, try to keep it real, but you know you're saying this is my problem. Asking for my wood and then you fucking trip on that. No problem. Backing up on wood, I don't know if you're ready. You keep asking why, but say you're stuck on this time. Can't you see you're looking for trouble? Try to keep it chill, try to keep it real, but you know you're saying this is my problem. Asking for my wood and then you fucking trip on that. No problem. Backing up on wood, I don't know if you're ready. You keep asking why, but say you're stuck on this time.
Hello, viewers. Welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is Figure Drawing Basics Part 77. I am your host, and I will be jumping into today's lesson in just a minute. With the video. All right. Yeah, so same model, different face. The only difference, same model, same face, different light source. So in this case, you got these little models right next to them to indicate where the light source is. So in this case, the light is directly on the face, as you can see, with just indications of where the shadows are forming. So underneath the nose, when the light is directly on the face, similar to I want to make sure that it's in view, similar to here, as you could see, the light source is directly on the face, and you could see that on the bottom. I'm going to use this here. That's where the shadow is forming, just like it is over here. In a way, you can't really see the details like the nostrils as you could on here, but you could see in the same indication that that's where the light source is. Also at the bottom of the chin, right? There is no neck attached to it, but you could see that the shadows are forming right about here because it's blocking all light from accessing that area. Next, we got this one right here. And this is the best that I could do with the light source. So you could see that it's directly on the right side. It's really coming from here. So most of the highlights are right here, over here, basically at the peaks of a plane. So these are planes, like the forehead area, that's a plane. This is another plane right here. This right here is another plane. So at the peak of the plane, since the cheek really has volume, you know, curves, there's a high point on it. And that high point is where the highlights are going to be most. So this is another plane right here, as you could see. This is another plane. So just areas that, I don't know, how would I describe it? Sections, planes, I'm going to say, are just like sections. So this is another section. This is another section right here. And all of them have a certain alignment, right? So this one has an alignment going this way. This plane right here has an alignment going this way. The forehead has a plane that's going this way. The side of the nose right here, that's another plane that's going downward. So then the bridge in the nose, like the very top of it, that's another plane as well. So all of these planes actually just play a role, and they're divided into all these different sections to give you guys a better understanding of their shape, how they're formed, and how the light source affects these planes. So hopefully that's a pretty clear description. For me at the beginning, it was kind of difficult to understand these terms, but once I saw them visually and I understood them visually, it made it easier to understand material when using that term, planes. And you guys are going to see it more. Actually, let me see if I could find. There is a page where I talk about planes. So I'm going to say this is this is a good example of planes here. This right here is a demonstration. The forehead area, that's a plane right here. This section is another plane. You guys see that the bridge of the nose right here. That's also another plane right in between the brow line. That's a plane as well. So now you guys can really understand, when people refer to planes, like there are multiple planes on the forehead. There's this section right here, that's a plane. And then one that starts to lean further back. So, going this way. So it's all divided into sections to give you guys a better understanding. Like, okay, this is the general size of the plane in this direction. And then there's another plane that's going to start forming the curve. That's another size, and so on and so forth, until it really creates the shape all the way around dimensionally. So here, that's another example of a plane right here. The circular section, that's another plane. So just little by little, the face is constructed using all these different planes. So you could see the area for the chin as well. That's a plane as well. And that's useful for specifically these purposes, to understand visually in your mind's eye the 3-dimension of the face, 3-dimension of the body, or so on and so forth. And you guys are going to see that more often, and you're going to come across that word very frequently when it comes to books, drawing books. Talking about how to construct the face or how to construct the body. You're going to hear that term very frequently. So hopefully that gave you guys a pretty good understanding of it. I know it could be a little bit confusing. But going back to this page here. So as we were discussing, you guys could see in this perspective, it's very similar. A lot of shadows cast within the sockets of the eyes, similar to how it is here. And you could see that. I'm going to try to do even more of a dramatic light source example. So you could see that the top of the forehead, it's not getting that much light. Most of the light, as we mentioned, it's coming from the right side. So it's slowly going to creep in this direction. It's going to hit this nose right here. It's going to cast a shadow. The cheekbone is going to cast a shadow for the internal part, because again, the light is traveling this direction. It's kind of missing this little dip in there. I want to say it's like, I don't know, think of it as like a light beam, right? If it's a light beam that's going through, it's coming at such force that, unlike water, it's not going to take the shape of the face. It's going to just directly pass whatever is in the way, and whatever is in the way of it is going to block any other light. So that's why you see no light or very little light forming in this area. A lot of that light is also reflective light too. So the strong light is coming across, hitting the nose, and then bouncing over to this side. So it's going to illuminate some areas of it. You know, also off of this plane as well. It's going to come here, it's going to bounce off, and it's going to shine some light here. And as you can see, like in the center right about there, it's the darkest spot. So that's also another thing to recognize. When it comes to shading, when it comes to shadows, there's reflective light as well. So similar to this diagram, as you guys could see, anything over to the left side is pretty much in the shadows, as you could see here. Now, there isn't really that much that's being revealed on this side. The bridge of the nose as well on the left side, it's pretty much in shadows. So just note, and this is something that I was talking about yesterday as well, totally different faces, right? They're not exactly the same. Their face features are different, but how the shadows form and how the light forms around the face is pretty much identical, right? And that's really why I'm demonstrating using this and this, so that you guys could see that there are fundamental principles to when it comes to how the light affects the face, how the light forms, and how the shadows form on the face, regardless of the face features. So yeah, just by taking a look at that, you guys can see the diagrams here. I'm trying not to spend too much time talking about it. You guys can always check out the previous stream as well. You guys can get access to all of these streams up until this episode by going to the video section, the Twitch channel, and filtering based on collection. And there you'll see a folder, and that folder is going to be divided into each stream. And you guys can have access to it. You can go back to as far back as the first episode. So just a little note there. So yeah, I'm going to jump into this one. I'm going to try to render it out as well as any of these other ones. It's a perfect opportunity to practice getting more stability with the pencil. You know, it's not really doing much. You know, you're not constructing any scenes, you're not constructing any characters or anything. It's really about blending very well. And I'm not using any tools. I'm not using any Blender tools or anything like that. You could, but I think it's better to, as I mentioned, gain more control over the pencil. You know, really become very sensitive and in tune with it. So that way you really are just in control of it, not the other way around. You know, you're able to do as you wish with it. Any softness or hardness that you want to gain from it, you will. You know, and this is the best way to go about it. You just practice these shadings. You become really sensitive to how much you have to press in order to get this sort of effect or to get that sort of effect. So I suggest not to use tools for blending and just, as I mentioned, get better at wielding the pencil. You know, become more and more in tune with it, become even more sensitive towards your hand pressure as well, like how much control you have over your hand and how much pressure you're putting onto the paper and how much pressure you're putting onto the pencil. So another important note, when it comes to shading, when it comes to working on the face especially, nothing is as white as the paper. Even in this diagram, when I'm looking at it, it may seem that it's really bright, or you might want to give the impression that something is getting a lot of light, a lot of highlights. Still not as white as the paper. So that's why I'm kind of going over this. I'm giving the entire face a very light coat. And I'm going to gradually darken it. Again, I'm going to keep pushing it further and further until it really brings out more dimension. Similar to this one. I'm going to say that the technique for this one was pretty good. This one, in terms of the lighting as well. But overall, I would say this one was pretty close to the actual reference. And it's a very common mistake that people make of giving or making the drawing a little too light. Drawing the skin tone way too light, while drawing the shadows way too, I guess more so dark. I wouldn't say too dark, it's just that because their highlights everything else is so light, it's as white as the paper. Their shadows, even though they might be actually right in terms of their darkness, there is just too drastic of a contrast. A little too dark there. Too drastic of a contrast, and that breaks the illusion of 3D and flattens out the image. So be very careful about doing that. And because I'm actually pressing lightly, despite going over the same area multiple times, it's still not ingrained into the paper as hard as, let's say, if I was to press really hard to get the shadows. And that allows me to erase if they go a little too dark. So this one is actually very similar to this image. There's more light, even more light illuminating it. So it's from above. This is this example right here. These two are from above. The light source is coming from above. And since the light source is coming from above, the nose is kind of blocking more light from accessing the lips, so the upper part of the lip is going to be in shadow. It's folding inwards. So as you could see, this area, it's folding inwards, so less light can actually come in that direction. Light doesn't really work like water. It doesn't take shape of whatever object it collides with or it covers. It's very much like a beam, so if it's going down this way and, these areas get hit by this light beam, let's say, anything dipping inwards is going to be in shadow. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. I'm going to be giving her lips, the upper part of her lip, shadow. Now this is more of a dramatic example, just to give you an idea of yep, it's going to be from the top. So these areas, you see it being so dark, is just to say this is where shadows are going to form. But how they actually form on a face is, of course, there's more variety. It's not going to be these solid blocks as you see on here. But generally, That's the gradation. It's going to come from here down, and it's going to get darker. Even the eyes, actually, the inside of the eyes, even though we see them and we see white, right? You look inside and where the pupil and iris are, all the way around it, it seems white. But in reality, it's in shadow still. You know, because of the eyelids, because of the sockets of where the eyes are, they're deeply set in, so they're going to block some of the light from accessing it. All that doesn't make that area, that white area, actually white. And it makes a world of a difference when you're rendering things, especially if you're doing realistic work. It could actually make it look more real when you add that shadow. Because again, you're constructing illusion here. You're not actually, you know, it's not a photo. You're just noticing details, and how well you notice these details determine how realistic you're going to render the drawing. It's kind of similar to the difference of somebody who is new to drawing and you tell them to draw hands and they draw like, you know, hot dog fingers, you know, where it's not, there's no real angle to them. It doesn't go from like thick to thin. There are no bones or anything like that. It's just these like sausages basically, you know. And as opposed to somebody who's like, oh, there's this line right here, there's a line right there, there's like a crevice here, there's like the nail here, and then there's another one for the knuckle. You know, once you start putting that in, all of a sudden it transforms into something more relatable, or something more realistic. So that's kind of just to give you guys a better idea of like what really happens when you really start to pick up on all these little minute details. And practicing realism really allows you to hone your skill and technique more. Like, as you see, I'm not like creating scenes around in my hand, and my imagination isn't really going wild. It's very much about, you know, gaining more control over the pencil, gaining more control over the lines that I'm making, being very subtle with little details to construct the face. So it kind of slows things down a bit. You know, you are really trying to nail all those things. And it's something that I mentioned actually in like, I believe the first stream of figure drawing. Pretty sure it was figure drawing. First or second stream of figure drawing, where I give you guys examples of Picasso. And now those of you who are familiar with it, you guys know he is a famous painter. And he's very well known for cubism. So when you look at his portraits, they're all just kind of like puzzle pieces. They look like puzzle pieces that haven't been connected properly. But if you looked at his early work, you know, what he was doing in his years as a student and building his way up to it, it's realism. He did realism. So if you guys look up Picasso realism, you'll see some, or if you check out that second or first stream, you guys will see examples. Actually, in the first stream or the second stream, I go into detail and I give you guys examples. I show you his work in comparison and talking about, you know, what the benefit is of drawing from real life. And artists you wouldn't suspect of actually getting into it have their foundation in realism, because it pushes you to see details more. Like if you sit down and you do still life, you might be able to do a pretty good rendition of it, right? But there are moments where you're going to feel like, let me just take the shortcut here because I kind of want to get this piece done and want to see at how great it looks and so on and so forth, and kind of revel in your accomplishment there. Whereas you can't do that with figure drawing. Like if you take shortcuts with the face, if you take shortcuts with certain features, it's going to break the entire drawing. The figure isn't going to look well rendered, or isn't going to look real. Like for example, if you don't carefully compare to see which eye is higher, or if it's leveled, they're both on the same line. One isn't floating all the way to the left and the other one all closer to the bridge of the nose. There has to be like an equal distance between the two in order for it to look right, in order for the face to look realistic. So it's those kind of shortcuts that really push you to get better at drawing and to push yourself to get to the next level. Whereas I think with still life, for example, you're more likely, and I'm not saying across the board, because there's some people who are very good at rendering still life and actually really devote a lot of time and focus into making sure that the drawing looks great. But overall, you do want to challenge yourself. I mean, that's how you improve. You don't improve by being comfortable every time you sit down to draw. It's actually very much about challenging yourself, over and over and over again. If you guys were part of yesterday's live stream where I was where I showed you guys 15-minute video about Kim Jong-gi, unfortunately passed away yesterday. But yeah, just in the video, he's a great Korean illustrator, artist, great work, very good at rendering things in all different perspectives, and he pretty much mentions that as well. He talks about how you have to always challenge yourself. You have to think of different ways to draw things. You can't draw the same thing over and over and over again. That's you kind of running in the same place, running in circles kind of. At some point it was a challenge, it's no longer a challenge, and you're just kind of stuck doing the same thing over and over again. But with that challenge comes that doubt, right? When you're venturing into something new, you're like, oh, am I going to get this right? How long is it going to get me to make this right? I'm going to feel like I'm still learning, or that I'm not as proficient. It's going to creep in that doubt, and that's something that you have to get comfortable with, because that's part of that process. When you challenge yourself, which you need to level up, that doubt will start to creep in, and the more comfortable you're going to get with that, just understanding and respecting that it's just part of the process. It doesn't really mean you're never going to get anywhere, or you're not going to get good, or it's you don't have what it takes, or whatever that stuff starts to creep in. It doesn't mean any of that. It's just part of that process, and that's a good indication that you are challenging yourself, that you are actually taking it to the next level now. And just like any other time, once you get past it, you feel great about yourself, right? You're like, oh, I did it. I was able to do it. I set myself this goal and I actually accomplished it. And that's something that I'm facing, every single time. Every time I sit down to do something, especially from imagination, it's always this question of like, hey, are you going to be able to render this the way that you see it? Is it going to take you a really long time? All those questions really start to pour in. But I know in that moment that I'm setting myself on a new journey, and it's going to be an adventure. I'm going to be asking all these questions. I'm going to be pushing myself to make sure I get there. So in some ways it's nerve-wracking, but it's also exciting, and that's a healthy way to approach it. To approach that doubt that's going to creep in, that uncomfortable state that you're going to be in. Because a lot of people, when they look at, let's say, these videos, or they look at these artists who are publishing issues or like comic books or exhibitions, you think they just sit down and it's this simple process where they just sit and do quick paintings of things and boom, they got this amazing piece of work that they're going to be exhibiting. But there is that doubt that creeps in, if you're doing something new, if you're doing something, or you're challenging yourself to do something new, that's still present. In the same way, I want to say, like, for example, when it comes to reading, right? When you're not reading kids' books anymore, but when you were first starting to read, even that was posed itself as like a challenge, and you were like, oh, I'm not good at reading this, let's just say, right? But the more you read, the more you practiced reading, the easier it became. Now you pick up that same book that gave you that frustration and anxiety, and you breeze right through it, right? It's laughable that you are going to even spend much time reading it. You could read the entire book in like 5 minutes. But if you pick up a new book, right, and you pick up something that has like really high-tech words, or words that you've never read before, it's going to become uncomfortable. It's going to be challenging. Now suddenly all that confidence you had from that book, that children's book, is back to that same state, where you were when you were reading that kid's book for the very first time. That process comes back again. But if it wasn't for that first step, you wouldn't be at the step where you are now. So you just have to remember that you overcame that, and now you're going to be able to overcome this once you push yourself in this new state, but the same way you did for that other book. So it's the same idea when it comes to this. You're going to have to accept that every time you're going to do something different, it's going to be like picking up a new book that's even more complicated. And you're going to get past it. You're going to push your way through it, and you're going to understand the words. You're going to take the time to actually research their definition. You're going to look up ways that it's pronounced, what the word sounds like actually, what's the proper way of saying it. And then look at that. You're picking up this book and it's no longer a problem. You remember, this is how you pronounce these words. This is what that word means actually. It's not going to be as mysterious and as challenging, because you've already passed that hurdle. You're not as intimidated anymore. It's not so mysterious. And it's kind of funny, it's also like a metaphor for a lot of things in life when it comes to anything really, of relationships, people that you get to know. You don't really know anything about them. So it's this like mystery, right, that brings about this unknowing, not knowing, not being familiar. It brings about these questions and these doubts and all these other things. But once you get to know the person, right, once you know them more, those doubts start to, well, hopefully, the more time you spend with them, those doubts seem to dissipate more. You get a better understanding of that person, how they act, what their values are, and so on and so forth. It's a little bit more complicated when it comes to people, as opposed to hobbies and objects and stuff. But there is a similar stage. There is a similarity in that, and that's kind of like what I'm highlighting. Anything new, anything people don't know, they usually get into that state of mind, not knowing, doubts, maybe being defensive, even being like, oh, I don't, sweeping things under the rug. I don't need to know this book. I don't need to read it. It's not a big deal. I actually want to go and do something else and focus on that. Same way that people get defensive when it comes to relationships. I don't know. I'm not going to spend too much time getting to know this person. In fact, I'm I'm gonna go see what else is out there as well, you know. So it's these defense mechanisms that start to kick in because of this, like, I don't know state, you know. So it's a really important thing to realize and not fall for the pitfalls of it, you know. Not don't wuss out is basically it. Don't wuss out. It's good when you're in that state. It's a growing process, you know, whether it's growing in art, whether it's growing in relationships, whether it's growing in reading. Also, I don't know, reading isn't really an art form, I guess, but it could be used for an art form. But yeah, in that process, in the learning process, that's just something that happens. So if you respect that process more, if you understand it better, it becomes less intimidating and less frustrating. And you start to enjoy it. And that's why it's important to draw daily, you know, because you remember all these things. You're reassuring yourself, and the knowledge that you gain day to day sticks with you. And, you know, it's kind of like layering, you know, one day is one layer, then the next day is another layer. It's kind of like watercolor. You know, when you're putting that first layer, then the second layer, then the third layer, and the more layers you put on top of the watercolor, the darker it gets, right? It really starts to be more and more prominent on the page, as opposed to you do one layer, you let it dry. And I want to say, to really connect it to the learning process, it's like putting that one layer, letting it dry, and have it really seep into the paper, and then it slowly dissipates, and then you put another layer on top of it, and again it's the same level of intensity as the first time, and then it dissipates to nothing again. I want to say that analogy is like when people don't draw daily or paint or whatever it is that they're learning. If they have a lot of gaps in between the times that they sit down to do what they're doing, or to learn, or to improve, then it becomes like that analogy. It's like you do one layer and it just dissipates, and you come back and you're like, what was it again? Oh yeah, it's this. And then it's one layer again, and then it slowly dissipates. But if every day you come back to it, if the layer gets thicker and thicker, you get better and better, it's more visually prominent, and it becomes more ingrained in the paper, the same way as the knowledge becomes more ingrained into your head. You know, you've done it so many times, it committed itself to your memory. And the more you'll be familiar with that process when you're drawing, you're like, oh yeah, I know this is what it's like. This is what it was like for my previous project that I did 3 days ago and I finished, as opposed to the previous project which I did like 2 weeks ago, and I think this was what was going on there. You know, your memory is a little shoddy at that point. You don't remember all the lessons and all these different ideas as well, as opposed to, you know, just a couple of days ago or just yesterday. You know, you learned this new concept or this new idea, and the next day when you sit down, it all comes back to you a lot quicker. And I think that's like one of my best advices to you guys is learn to love that process, learn to respect it, learn to appreciate it, and know moments where, yeah, this is what stage I'm in right now. I'm in that leveling up stage. Things are coming back. I'm starting to doubt a little bit how well I'm going to do, whether I could get past it or not. You know, I'm sure when I'm going to look back at this, I'm going to be like, this was challenging to me. You know, at some point I'm going to look back and I'm going to question that. The same way as you look back at a kid's book and you're like, this used to be a challenge for me. eventually that kind of happens. And the only way it stopped being a challenge was through practicing over and over and over and over again. And this is exactly the same thing that's going to happen with this. So you guys see how gradual this process is, right? You're seeing how I'm not really rushing to get to the shadows as much. I'm layering it, and that allows me to adjust things little by little. Like if I could add a little bit more shadow underneath the eye to make the eye smaller, if I'm comparing and seeing like, now that I'm looking at it, might be actually too big or too small, and you could just gradually work more shadows into it. Whereas if I pressed hard and I was like, okay, this is where shadows are, and I would immediately go to that tone, right, to that same tone as in the reference, I might not have that option if I notice this little detail, like the eye is too small or too big. I'm like, oh crap, and now I have to like really not only ruin the image, but the paper as well. That's something that some of you might be familiar with, is when you erase, and actually you could see it here, I erased an old drawing because I was like, this is just one little drawing, and I didn't even bother using the rest of the paper for it, and I didn't like the drawing, so I just moved on from it. So I was like, you know what, just gonna erase it and actually utilize this paper. But you could still see it there, and it's hard to erase it, and if I keep doing it, the paper is just gonna wear itself away. And in turn, the drawing is gonna look uglier. I'm going to show you guys something interesting here. So notice the expression of the mouth, right? It seems a little bit sullen, right? She does more serious, kind of like a stern sort of look. Now watch what happens when I add just a little bit of shadows to the corners of the mouth. See what's happening there? Just a little bit of shadow. I'm not even pressing hard. And look at how much it transformed the expression into more of like a smile. It's just a testament to like how every little thing really makes a huge difference. It's nerve-wracking a little bit, right? If you were to think about it, like, man, really that small of a thing can make such an impact on a drawing. But at the same time, it's kind of exciting. It's cool because just something simple like that could breathe life into a drawing. It's the word that I'm looking for. I guess it's awesome, right? That's like a definition of like awesome. It's an awesome reality, kind of. I think it also plays into life as well. You know, how people think like, oh, this is insignificant. Like what I'm going to say to a person, what's the big deal? And I think that a lot of people have a little bit more anxiety when it comes to that. And they're like, oh man, everything I say is going to become like a real butterfly effect. Might be more negative and so on and so forth. And that's another reality to deal with. That's something that makes things nerve-wracking for a lot of people, I want to say. But it's also a learning experience too, right? So like you understand how things make a difference in what you say, and then you adjust to that. You know, you're like, oh, okay, well, and you could always, you know, similar to a drawing, you could kind of work on it. You could improve it. You know, when dealing with people, you should be able to do that. And if you actually mean to fix things, or if you actually mean to fix what you said, you could always be like, oh, what I really meant was this, or whatever else. And that kind of, and also that's a learning experience too. Like you could see which people are gonna be there for that talk, how they're gonna handle it, you know, whether they're actually gonna give you room to fix that idea, or if they're gonna chastise you for the rest of your life for it, or whatever. It's also a learning experience in that as well. Maybe you could even say how hard you press on the paper could be like a metaphor for how harsh your words are. You know, if you're using really harsh words, it's going to be kind of more and more difficult to erase them, right? It's going to leave an imprint on a person more, as opposed to if you were to just like word yourself in a lighter context, or express your ideas in a lighter form, as opposed to really harsh tones. And that's not to say it should always be that way. You know, sometimes you do need to press really hard, you know, the same way as sometimes you do need to actually be more harsh with your words, depending on the situation. Really depends on the situation. I'm gonna say it's but just kind of highlighting how interesting all these things are, how they can relate to each other in a way, you know, and how complex all these concepts are, whether it's drawing or whether it's, you know, interaction or whatever else. There's similarities and there are differences in all of them. And I think that's fascinating. That's really interesting. I think that's the word I was looking for. Fascinating, not awesome, but awesome still applies. It's still pretty good. Anyways, y'all, I'm not going to get into another rant. Unfortunately, the stream is coming to a close, at least for Figure Drawing Basics. I'm going to take a 5-minute break, get ready for the next stream, which is the project stream. It's the stream that I'm working from my imagination, like, mainly. I might use some references here and there. You guys, if you guys have been tuning in through the entire process for this one, you saw me use like a guitar or a bass rather as a reference, and then working from it to like shape it, looking at other comic books and noticing little details that they use, or comic book artists rather, that they're using in forming their panels, and just kind of like borrowing all those different elements and playing around with them, seeing how I could shape the scenes. So that's next. That's coming up in just a few minutes. If you guys enjoy this content, make sure you remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They both help the stream grow, reach out to more audience, and of course I would really appreciate it as well. Yeah, and that's pretty much it, y'all. So stick around and I will see you in 5.